at the next election. Tudge is the Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister. He says the government hasn't made up its mind on the best time frame. Tudge, welcome to Capitol Hill.
Thanks so much.
Is the idea of a referendum on recognition of Indigenous Australians in the Constitution being held in conjunction with the next election now effectively dead?
We want to put the referendum as soon as practically possible, but with the proviso that we absolutely maximise its chances of success, Lyndal. We know that it's very difficult to get referenda to be successful. Only 8 out of 44 in our history have been successful, and many of those 8 have been very, very simple propositions, such as allowing ACT members and Northern Territory members to vote in referenda or retirement ages for judges. So we want to be careful, deliberate, and have a referendum question which has the absolute best chance of succeeding.
Kem White says his committee is going to come up with a draft question in a few weeks, and he thinks a referendum would ideally be held at the latest 18 months after the next election. He says after that time you'd begin to lose impetus for it. Does the government have an idea in its head about what the outside time would be?
No, we haven't specified that. The Prime Minister, as you know, Lyndal, has said that we'd like to have it as soon as practically possible, but wanting for it to succeed. And of course, someone like Kem White is very influential on these matters. He's the chair of the Joint Standing Committee on the Constitutional Recognition, and he will, of course, be listened to very carefully. But we simply have not made up our minds yet as to when it should be held, and we need further consultations before coming to that conclusion.
You wouldn't, though, like to see too many years pass?
No, you wouldn't.
Between the idea coming up and the referendum being held?
No, of course you do want to maintain the momentum, and there is some momentum which has already been built, and we want to ensure that we maintain that momentum and have a clear pathway towards having a referendum question. We just don't want to lock ourselves in, because we want to leave as much flexibility as possible, because the overarching objective must be to have a unifying moment in our history rather than putting up a question which has the potential to fail.
Kem White says he'd like to see a relatively simple question. Is it possible to design a simple question, given that there are calls to deal with what's called the race power in the Constitution? Doesn't that automatically complicate the process?
I think it does if we do need to keep it relatively simple, because in order for a question to succeed, you have to have a broad consensus across the community. You must have bipartisan support as a prerequisite. That is absolutely essential. But additionally to that, you need to have a broad consensus across the Australian community, and that includes listening to those people who might have very good intentions and want to support the advancement of Aboriginal people, but be constitutionally conservative and therefore mount a campaign if anything too radical is proposed. So these are the real challenges which we've got. And of course, on the other hand, it's pointless putting something up if the Indigenous population generally is not going to support it.
So not something so small and inoffensive as to be effectively meaningless?
Yeah, that's right, and that's the real balance which we've got, is to ensure that it is something substantial, that we do properly recognise Aboriginal people in the Constitution, and where it can be a uniting effort, which includes the support from the Indigenous population, but without ostracising well-intentioned constitutional conservatives, because if they mount a campaign, they indeed could ensure that the referendum question does not succeed. So that's the balancing act which we've got to try to navigate through.
Now, you've been consulting on Andrew Forrest's review of Indigenous training and employment. It does include some controversial ideas, including the notion of a healthy welfare card, which would limit spending on things like gambling and alcohol. It also includes training linked to jobs and work for the dole and no work and no pay. What are you finding the response to those ideas is?
Yeah, Lyndal, we've been consulting across Australia over the last few weeks with roundtables, in public forums, in individual meetings with community leaders, with business leaders, with other people. By and large, people like the framework of the report, in it being a holistic report from early childhood through to employment. And it's the first time we've had such a holistic report delivered to the Prime Minister for Indigenous Affairs. So people like that. Inevitably, we're going to have some debate over some of the recommendations, and we've been listening to those ideas, listening to where there are concerns and what could be done perhaps differently to what Andrew Forrest has recommended. But overall, it's been a terrific process, and people have been actively engaged in it, and I think people want to see a difference made.
Alan Tudge, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks so much, Lyndal.